to look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for.
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to moved
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern states.
I'm pretty sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
it's not changed. But I'm pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia's decision.
If NATO has moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved.
NATO is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
Unfortunately, for 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So do you not understand it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians would perceive it as a threat, and the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border, while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. Right. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east. Correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But there's no reason for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, Matt.
It's like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hegel said.
We're blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member. Which is not a NATO member.
I see
other countries feel threatened.
What an idiot and a lying idiot. You're watching Inside the Numbers.
How much you wanna up it, that I can get you back inside your head. Before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit, and now here's your host, Rich Barris.
That was one of our favorite clips from Admiral John Kirby. Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. It's Friday, it's Q&A, Free Will and Friday. Get your questions, and Laura will throw them into the box, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. But that will be at the final segment. Right now, let's talk about the topic of the day, which we have three of. Number one, Stoltenberg says that members have agreed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO, basically proving detractors, and hate to say it, Vladimir Putin, the horrible, boogeyman himself, totally right for decades and decades and decades and decades. All right, here it is. Let's bring it up. NATO allies agree Ukraine will become a member. Jens Stoltenberg has repeatedly promised that Ukraine would join NATO throughout the war. And actually, if you cannot remember who Jens Stoltenberg is, we played this little short clip before of him being rarely honest about how this war got started.
It didn't start in February last year. The war started in 2014. And since 2014, NATO allies have provided support to Ukraine with training, with equipment. So the Ukrainian armed forces were much stronger in 2022 than they were in 2014. And of course, that made a huge difference when President Putin decided to attack Ukraine.
And in fact, a lot of people would say, including people like John Mearsheimer, who is looking like a stud right now, he was the author of the book we just wrapped up on the Book Club for Locals, which now YouTube members have access to, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Of course, he would argue that this started actually in Brussels back in 08, or excuse me, 05? 05. So yeah, and I could be wrong about that. It could be 05 through 08. Anyway, bottom line is, and I could be wrong, period. It could be 04 for all. But the meeting in Brussels where Putin wanted a firm, clear acknowledgement that Ukraine would not become a part of NATO, period, end of story, full stop, which they blew smoke for years to the media, to you, to everybody. And we're going to look at a Newsweek article as well as this one from Sky News because it's important. And this is, of course, a show about numbers and polling and everything. And it's important to show the role that polling plays in this lie, in this propaganda. The Kremlin maintains that preventing this from happening is one of the goals of its war in Ukraine. What do you mean it maintains? It's maintained for a long time, for almost 2 decades. This isn't new. All NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine will become a member, says Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. You know, that's funny because Viktor Orban immediately went to Twitter and said, what? Quote tweeting an article from the Euro version of Politico. Speaking ahead of a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, he also told reporters that once the war in Ukraine ends, Kiev must have, quote, the deterrence to prevent new attacks. That's making an awful lot of assumptions, don't you think? Well, why do they think that they're still going to have a place when this war is over? See, I've told you in the past that very clearly what Vladimir Putin wanted was the ethnic Russian, which happens to be the productive region of Ukraine. The rest are basically takers. I mean, look, let's be real. The West is filled with takers. The East is filled with makers and workers and ag and energy. And on. The West has nothing but Western money from other Western countries. So what makes him think because now doing this, what you are putting now into Vladimir Putin's new equation is whether or not he really should just settle with Eastern Ukraine. They intend to launch an offensive, as I told you they did, in the Crimea, despite being absolutely destroyed at the Battle of Bakhmut. Destroyed. They just lost a national treasure opera star. He was killed in the fighting, and they are retreating. They just announced it today. They're not going to make any effort to take it back. They intend to regroup and listen to the West and try to, quote, isolate Crimea. Folks, you've got to be kidding me. He said that the main focus is now to ensure the country prevails against Russia. Well, that somehow wasn't the focus before, because we were told Ukraine was winning this war until those documents leaked, and now we were all wondering whether or not we would see a pivot, we would see some kind of a shift. But I don't know why anybody was wondering that. The truth never bared any any weight whatsoever on the decision-making process of Western elites. They have financial interests in Ukraine, including their own, including the U.S. president and his family. They were always going to take this road regardless of how the war was really going. And how the war is really going is that Ukraine's air defense systems have been totally demolished. Biden's new package is an attempt to replenish them. And we're going to read about some of this now. Ukrainians are dying at a 7 to 8 to 1 ratio. Estimated of half of their entire counted population is gone. As predicted. They are being bloodlet. But if you listen to Secretary Austin, a Secretary of Defense who doesn't believe in civilian control of the military, which is pretty much a bedrock principle of our entire system of government. He doesn't believe in it. We have a Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, who doesn't believe in diplomacy, the nation's top diplomat. And if you listen to them, the goal is to bloodlet Russia. It's to bleed them dry. It's to put Putin out of power by bleeding Russia dry. What it really does is push Russia closer to the Chinese. Article in the New York Times, I debated whether or not I was going to read it to you or not. They just now start to come around and tell you the truth. And the truth is that Russia, most of the casualties they have put forward are not at all their best fighters. Upwards of 20% of these convicts that they released from prison are HIV positive and were promised antivirals or retrovirals if they were to fight for them. They did all this damage in Ukraine with backbenchers. A misunderstanding of how Russians fight led mass numbers of people in this country to believe Western propaganda that somehow the Russian army was incompetent, they're fleeing the battlefield, they're losing, the Ukrainian soldiers are super brave and super honorable, and they're winning and pressing on. No, they're not. So somehow now the main focus, he says, is to ensure the country prevails against Russia. What was the main focus before? Right. It comes after Mr. Stoltenberg yesterday pledged continued support for the country during his visit to Kiev since Russia's invasion just over a year ago. Quote, "Let me be clear. Ukraine's rightful place is in the Euro-Atlantic family," he told a news conference. Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO. Folks, rewind over a year ago, we were saying everybody's, honestly, people like Tucker, people on that side, our side, because it was our side of the argument, we're saying all you have to do is give Russia a guarantee that Ukraine will not become a part of NATO. And they were lying. You just heard Admiral, the scumbag liar Kirby, right there, do this dance and lie about whether or not they intended to put Ukraine in as a member of NATO. No wonder they wouldn't give Vladimir Putin that. No wonder why it's a very simple list of 5 demands that really did not have any bearing on our vital interests whatsoever. And here he is from yesterday, in fact. Hold on.
And all NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine will become a NATO member. But the main focus now is, of course, on how to ensure that Ukraine prevails.
Right, there it is. And in fact, the first part of his statement doesn't even appear to be true. As I said, the Hungarian prime minister has come out and said, what? Who said that? Poland, very shaky on the idea of Ukraine being a member of NATO. Turkey doesn't even want to be a part of NATO anymore. That was hatched out. So the win we have at all of this is Finland. And it is a part of a border. So, you can count it as a win, but is it worth the cost? There is no Warsaw Pact anymore. Is it worth the cost? Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Thursday that preventing Ukraine from joining NATO remains, notice the choice of words, one of the goals of what Moscow calls its special military operation. He said that Ukraine's accession would pose a, quote, serious, significant threat to our country, to our country's security. That is vocabulary of a man who is telling you that this now could escalate to total war. No great power would sit back and allow, without response, aggression up to their country's border. And it is aggression. There is no other word for it. Book club folks, you know what I'm talking about. We spent weeks learning vocabulary, just as if you were like I, sat in a class all day. We are the aggressors here. President Vladimir Zelensky said earlier this week that he was grateful for an invitation into the alliance, but said his country needs a roadmap for becoming a member. That's measured talk by Zelensky, who's trying to look for his way to survive. Of course, he wants to become part of NATO, but he's losing the war. So he can't now just jump right into NATO's lap because he's not sure if the commitment, even under Article 5, could save him at this point. So he needs some wiggle room with Vladimir Putin. Because if they ever decide, and he knows what this means now that in Moscow, it's no longer, we already took Eastern Ukraine. How do we preserve it? How do we preserve the Crimea? which they've had for years now. So this idea there's an offensive to the Crimea, again, is the literal definition of aggression. The literal definition. And now, if you're Vladimir Putin, you thought, well, I've lost this much. If they're going to take Kiev, what remains of Ukraine after I'm done taking more than half of the country, or at least industry-wise, are they going to forever be a pain in my ass on my border under Article 5 threat constantly? Because if so, it may just be worth it for me to press forward to Kiev with actual troops. President Vladimir Zelensky said what he said because he is hedging. In May, Finland joined the alliance, setting aside years of military non-alignment in order to seek protection under the organization's security umbrella after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The country's ascension dealt a major political blow to Russian President Vladimir Putin as it doubled the size of NATO's border with the nation. Well, of course, and that's why he's going to have to keep going. But there's no real, honestly, guys, let's just be real for a second. It doubled the size of it. But Finland now being a member of NATO just means that we will be stretched in defending that much more of that border. Neighboring Sweden is also expected to join, but so far Turkey, who actually has military power, unlike the other two countries, has blocked its approval due to, quote, security concerns. Let me lay that out for you. Turkey's joining with Russia and China. They're out. That's going to happen. Anyone who can see any distance in the future knows that it's a very complicated situation going on in Turkey. But the fact of the matter is there was always elements in the country that were wondering whether or not NATO was really a good fit for that country anyway. But Turkey, India, the Saudis, the United Arab Emirates, a whole bunch of countries now are starting to realize NATO may not be the best bet here. NATO may be the losing bet. Because the further we push against Russia, the closer we push them with China. India is sitting back going, for now, let's just try to get around the petrodollar, and we'll talk a little bit more after. We'll see how it goes down the road. If you're Turkey, you're bailing too. NATO allies have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops and provided 65 billion euros of military aid alone. All right, that's fantastic. And we have Biden. We're going to talk about this more in a second, but or 57 billion. On Friday, the Canadian government announced another 28.9 million. That's nothing. It's a drop in the hat. That will include 40 sniper rifles, 16 radio sets, and a donation to a NATO fund to help Kiev in the war. A day earlier, both Denmark and the Netherlands said they plan to provide Ukraine with at least 14 refurbished Leopard 2 battle tanks by early. Yeah, but again, I was just going to make the point here that they won't even enter the battlefield until at least early 2024. Who says that there will even still be a war going on at that point? Tanks the country pleaded Western nations for in order to give its forces the firepower they needed to retake occupied territory. Okay, so let me actually get you, just so we can talk about the impact of public opinion on this stuff. Let's look real quick at the Newsweek version of this. All right. Isabel von Broggen, all right, said bottom line, blah, 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 blah. Hold on. Stoltenberg fell short of offering a timeline on when Ukraine could become a member of NATO and said the main focus now is to ensure, right, that the country prevails, again, as if it wasn't the main focus before, right? President Vladimir Putin said Moscow had annexed 4 Ukrainian regions partially controlled by Russia. Should Ukraine become a member of the military alliance, NATO would be obligated to take action to defend it against Russia in the ongoing war. Again, absolute stupidity. We're going to wage war to take back the Donbass? People who don't even want us there, don't even want Ukrainians there? They have no intent to be under Kiev's yoke. No desire. Ukraine must have, quote, the deterrence to prevent new attacks once the conflict's end, Stoltenberg told reporters. Let's move. Here we go. I kid you not. You think I'm kidding? You guys thought I was kidding weeks ago. His remarks come after he visited Kiev on Thursday for the first time since Putin invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. And as Ukraine is expected to soon launch a counteroffensive aimed at recapturing territory seized by Russian forces. They couldn't even stand their ground in Bakhmut. Folks, at a certain point, it becomes a matter of bodies. You're trying now to replenish. It's more than just what you equip people with. Yes, after the U.S.-led coup in 2014 overthrew a democratically elected government in Ukraine, Putin thought that it would be easier to roll over this country. Without a doubt, that's true. Moscow did underestimate how much we trained the Ukrainians in that 8-year period, but while they were bombing innocent people in the Donbass, by the way. But you can't replace trained soldiers like that. People who have been sitting on the sidelines, waited to be battle-hardened, especially not with 15 and 16-year-old boys. It doesn't matter what you give them. Doesn't matter how many leopards they get to drive in. Doesn't matter how many stingers you put on their shoulder. Doesn't matter how many AT-4s you put in boxes. If they don't know how to fight, they don't know how to fight. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky hailed the visit as a new chapter in relations with NATO. There is not a single objective barrier that would prevent the adoption of political decisions on inviting Ukraine to the alliance. And right now, when the majority of people in NATO countries and the majority of Ukrainians support the entry of our state into the alliance, it is time for appropriate decisions. It is no longer possible to imagine the security of the Euro-Atlantic space without Ukraine, and people understand this. What does he mean by that? How can he be so certain to say that? Well, Newsweek, conveniently, 7 days ago, published a poll by Redfield or whatever it's called that showed a slight majority. It was not even a big majority. A slight majority of Americans said that they would support Ukraine entering NATO. However, look at how the question is asked. I guarantee you, if I poll this, we're going to get maybe a quarter to a third of Americans saying yes, because I'm going to pose it right. Do you support or oppose Ukraine entering or becoming an ally of the North American Trade Alliance, or NATO, whatever you want to say? The NATO is how they're going to phrase it. North American Treaty Organization is not, they're not going to recognize that. NATO. And you can maybe put it in parentheses or something. Spell it out. Even if it means invoking Article 5, directly injecting the United States into the conflict against Russia. In other words, if you just ask Americans whether or not they want Ukraine to become a member of NATO, they're going to say yes, because Americans are very, by the way, Robert Kennedy was on Tucker Carlson last night and explained what's going on there very well. Americans are very compassionate people. They ultimately try to seek out the state of liberty. They want the world to be in the most natural state, calm. They don't like the boat rocking, and they want people to be free. They don't like when they look across the pond at anywhere else, and they don't like seeing, the human condition suffering. And frankly, our leaders take advantage of that in the form of how generous we are and how compassionate we are. But the fact is, they don't want to fight Russia for Ukraine. They don't. So reword that question, which, you know what, Laura, we may do. Reword that question into, do you support or oppose Ukraine becoming a member of NATO if it means a direct, total war with Russia? Ladies and gentlemen, majorities of Democrats in this country told Quinnipiac they wouldn't even stay and fight for this country. Quinnipiac asked them, if we were in a similar situation as the Ukrainians, would you stay and fight or would you leave? A bigger majority of Democrats than the entire majority being touted right here in Newsweek in support of Ukraine joining NATO. A bigger majority of Democrats than that said they would run. They are not going to support great power conflict so Ukraine can be a part of NATO. And don't you find it a little convenient that their softly worded question came out 6 days ago? Commenting on Stoltenberg's trip to Ukraine, Stoltenberger, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters on Thursday that stopping Ukraine from joining NATO was unconditionally. That means total war. Otherwise, there would be a serious, substantial threat to our country and its security. That means total war. When someone says this is a vital national security threat or this is unconditional, they start using terms like that. It means great power conflict. They are willing because they feel they have no other recourse. They are willing to engage in a great power war. When Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, stands up and says the islands in the South China Sea are a vital national security interest to the U.S., what she is telling Beijing is that we are willing to go to war for those islands. That's diplomat speak. God, the time moves by so quick. Segment's almost up. So with all this said and done, they were never, ever going to openly give Putin that, like, I remember a monologue by Tucker when it happened. Why doesn't Joe Biden just come out and say that NATO membership is off the table? Because they've been lying for 15 years, folks. More. They've been lying since that summit in Brussels, which, like I said, Mearsheimer points out as the moment that they being Western elites, put us on this trajectory to a great power conflict with Russia, who now has China and India, well, India softly, but China on their side. We can't, folks, this is the dumbest, if this happens, if Stoltenberg is not talking out of his, you know what, and this was to happen, this would be one of the dumbest foreign policy blunders since the Iraq invasion, and give it time. It may actually turn, which the Iraq invasion I consider to be the dumbest of our lifetime. And I'll explain that in a second. But this would top invading Iraq. It would, because when you're looking at foreign policy, you're looking at how it changes the balance of power. That is how the international system works. It is a constant fight for relative power. And when an aggressor, a great power like the United States, becomes an aggressor like they are now, they scare other nations into forming balancing coalitions against them. Europe eventually balanced against Napoleonic France. It took them a while, but it happened, and then they crushed Napoleon. Only after, by the way, the reason they didn't balance against Napoleon is because most of the historical recurrences that you hear about or recalls that you hear about are not really true. Napoleon was not aggressive in the beginning. He wasn't. France was not. Napoleonic France became aggressive later when others started to become concerned about him. And then he said, you know what, the hell with this. We are by far the most powerful nation on the continent, and I'm about to flex. And then, even though it took them a while, they eventually did balance against Napoleonic France. Wilhelmine Germany, same situation. Germany, honestly, great powers should have balanced against them a couple of years earlier, and then maybe they would have been able to prevent, the no man's land, the stalemate, and so many people dying. But they did not. Hitler, same situation, always using the wrong historical analogies. It's so overused by this generation of old, crusty leaders in this country because we are shaped. Our views are shaped by our experiences, our life experiences. So as Jack Snyder says, we're susceptible to these myths of empire based on what generation we are. To John Cornyn in Texas, he's so old. Go home, John. End your career. Just go home. You are not rising to the occasion. Hearkening back to the lessons of Munich is your flaw. It's not every single foreign policy crisis is not a question of Neville Chamberlain and the lessons of Munich. They are not all comparable, but they remember that. Lindsey Graham's another one, burned into their minds. It's generational. And now with the NATO and the US, EU expansion, EU aggression, NATO aggression, The powers of Asia, Eastern Europe are obviously going to look at it and they're going to say, we need to form a balancing coalition to push back on this. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We agitated, and we have no hope to balance against this coalition. Not now, we don't. Because as we speak, they're cutting our knees out. We allowed them to by weakening the petrodollar. That is the only reason why we have been able to incur and maintain such an enormous debt. Start trading for oil in the yuan, and that's all over. It's all over. It's the only reason we've been able to maintain this. By the way, the last financial crisis we had, the Chinese wanted to do us dirty. They wanted to call their debt. Putin stopped them. You never hear about this, but it's true. Putin said, you know what? I've taken measures to insulate Russia's economy, but if we do this, and he didn't do it because he's a nice guy. He did it because even though he had taken measures to isolate his economy from Western disruptions like sanctions and idiocy and stupid policy of trying to get everyone to buy a home and they can't afford, and racking up ridiculous debts for social welfare programs that nobody can afford anymore. He knew that if he did it, if he went along with the Chinese plan, it would hurt the Russian economy and it would hurt the Russian people. And he, regardless of what you hear, does derive his consent from the government. And if his people are suffering, then he will suffer. Eventually. So he didn't do it. The moves they're making now, next time we won't be so lucky. China probably has more to lose than he does at this point. So God, you better pray to the Almighty that the Chinese don't feel like their economy is strong enough to take such a hit. Because 13 years ago, they were ready to pull the trigger, or 14 years ago now. They were like, we'll deal with it. It'll be great to get America off the global, as what they think falsely to be a global hegemony. There is no such thing as a global hegemony. We're learning this lesson painfully now. And once you squander being the gold standard currency, the standard currency of the world, once you squander that position, it's gone. Ask the British. Once you squander hegemony, very, very difficult getting it back. You fall. You don't get back up, especially not with two other great powers aligned against you. The irony of all of this is that the logical conclusion, without the U.S. being stupid and aggressive, the logical conclusion, had Trump or something been reelected and we stopped this foolishness, we abandoned this foolishness, we just, again, I hate to, cite it again, but it's true. We just ended the final chapter a couple weeks ago in Tragedy of Great Power Politics. And since he's right about everything else, and his theory seems to explain most of the liberal nation-state order timeline, I tend to take him a little bit seriously. But the logical thing here would have been for the United States to show restraint, and then the Russians, who are in the same region, they share a part, now not all of it, because Russia is in two regions or two spheres of influence. They're in Europe's sphere of influence, and they're Northeast Asia, so they're in Asia's sphere of influence. The logical thing would have been to establish a somewhat working relationship with Russia, who would have shared our concerns about a rising China. We already had India. Modi loved Trump. That would have been the smartest move here. And as an offshore balancer, just pick at them. Pick at them as they rise. Do everything in our power to thwart their plan of achieving at least regional hegemony and putting the rest of the world into what is essentially an international, global, feudal system where everyone pays homage to the Middle Kingdom. Instead, we pump this country with stupid Russia-phobia, playing off of the political ambitions of a party and the fears of an ignorant populace being brainwashed with hoaxes and conspiracy theories? How do we dig ourselves out of this? It's one stupid decision after the other. Next dumb decision, counteroffensive in the Crimea. You got to be kidding me. I really wish I could say that I'm over exaggerating or something. I'm not. Believe me, I'm not. Yeah, I got a lot of panties in a bunch yesterday talking about a certain candidate's influencers being the nastiest people I've ever encountered. We are going to talk about that because they are the nastiest. And you know what I think it is? Yeah, they're just the most organized. I don't think Hillary Clinton supporters were that organized. And they were pretty organized. I could tell you about a real dirty trick that some Clinton supporters tried to pull on us in 2016. Dirty trick. Trying to basically influence the poll results. I mean, that was the goal, Laura, right? When you send like a honeypot from your past, right? I mean, that was the goal. I don't want to blow her up, so I'm not going to blast her name out. I don't want to embarrass her family. But I've seen a lot. Trump supporters can be pretty rowdy. They can attack. Obama supporters were pretty nasty, without a doubt. But I'll tell you what, folks, DeSantis supporters, they're bad. And immediately, if you look at the replies in that tweet, I mean, they just prove my point. I don't have to say anything. I just have to shut up and just let them reply with vitriol and hatred. It's always personal attacks, devolved into personal attacks. And here's the thing. If you're claiming to be the new Trump, the calmer Trump, the sharper Trump, the more polished Trump, but this is what you do, I don't understand why anybody would choose you. Because you're really not. You're a pretender. Trying to be the real thing. The only difference is the real thing isn't pretending to be somebody else. So what the hell's the difference? Weeks ago now, this all started when I put that graph up from polling, showing, whoa, what happened to DeSantis? He went from like 30% to low 20s, and Trump is headed to 60 right now. One night of interviews with that graph we were showing you, he was at 60 nationally. Can't wait to get back in the field, which we are going to talk about in a bit. I have some stuff I got to use, got to get it done. So support the Public Polling Project, links in the description. And on the Democratic side, we're going to be doing a three-way between Joe Biden, RFK Jr., and Mary. So, and someone, we're also going to list somebody else or someone else and undecided. But we want to winnow down the field to stop people from picking just, off the cuff Michelle Obama. Like, that's not going to happen. Pete Buttigieg, unless Biden's going to announce apparently tomorrow, unless Pete Buttigieg seizes on Biden, and I don't want to say it out. I don't like saying these things, but it is possible that Trump's not the nominee. It's possible that Biden's not the nominee. Things can happen. Life happens. And don't want to say it out loud, but there's always two very real possibilities that the field can, that the current leader of a field can be taken out. And I don't, taken out of the race. And I don't want to even, I believe words have power, and I don't want to speak that into the ether against anybody. So I'm not going to. But I don't see how Pete Buttigieg becomes a real candidate unless that happens. Elizabeth Warren. Who else do we have on there? Michelle Obama, right? Kamala Harris is not going to run unless something is removes Joe Biden from contention. It's just not going to happen. So that brings up a question. Shouldn't we just ask a follow-up about people who are declared only? Right? So we know who is running in some of these races. We know who it is. So we don't need to guess or make hypotheticals. This is the reality of the field right now. So isn't it worth, at the very least, doing a follow-up and saying, we know DeSantis is in. So even though he didn't announce, we know he's in. So for the Republicans, Trump, Vivek, Haley, DeSantis. and may or may not. Tim Scott launched that exploratory committee. When you do that, you almost always run. So I think Tim Scott probably needs to go in there. And that's something we're going to debate here a little bit later. But on the Democratic side, Marianne Williamson is in, RFK Jr. is in, Joe Biden is in. And that's, and then that's reality. So let's see if we do the crowded field and we also do the winnowed down field. All right, but anyway, going back to the original thing, which I do want to talk about more, though, in any other segment. I have to take a break here in a second. When someone is giving you observations about why your candidate is losing, responding with personal attacks and attempts to assassinate someone's character and, by the way, defaming and libeling people doesn't really bode well for your candidate. It makes no sense. I'm obviously right. I was way ahead of the curve. Why wouldn't you shut up and listen? Right? Don't you want to correct your problem? It doesn't seem to make any sense to just attack. At some point, you either have to take advice or you're just going to continue to lose and embarrass yourself. I don't really care which one you do. I'm just telling you, it doesn't make any sense. I see you up there, Laura. Go ahead.
It does make sense. It makes complete and utter sense to attack somebody because what they are doing is they have no facts to support their views. And when you are providing the truth, all they have is just vile comments to try to, what they're trying to do is make you angry and upset so you say something stupid.
Discredit myself. Yeah.
Yes, but other than that, that is their only path because they know you're speaking the truth and they hate you for it. So therefore, when they attack you, I just laugh and I'm like, oh, petty children, please go home.
The record is the record.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Amen. Amen.
The record is the record.
That's it.
Yeah. And by the way, to this day, we're still one of the more moderate. I don't even know how moderate isn't the word. We're still one of the polls that show more less support for Trump than some other polls do. So simply showing that Trump was at 60 that night, overall, he was only at 52, right? I think I got to go check it, something like that. And he ranges from 43 to 55, stuff like that. But others have been now significantly way beyond. We just showed the start of the trend. So obviously we were right. And by the way, he did fall below 20. DeSantis did fall below 20 in the Reuters Ipsos poll, and I suspect he's going to do it. If this keeps up, he's going to do it again. I do just want to, you know what? Let's take a break and then we'll come back. I'm actually going to save the Twitter segment for after. We could just have a little bit of fun with it. But on this note, I want to show you something, actually, okay, that I have to give Raheem credit for. But it's worth showing you because it's, once again, of course, I was telling you the truth when others were not. All right, let's take a quick break. National security experts are warning that our aging power grid is more vulnerable than ever. January marked the third time a power station in North Carolina was damaged by gunfire. Authorities are saying the attack raises a new level of threat and are now checking our grid for vulnerabilities. They identified 9 key substations. If these substations are attacked, power could be knocked out from coast to coast for up to 18 months. Imagine it. A blackout lasting not days, but weeks or months. Your life would be frozen in time right at the moment the power fails. Lights all over the country would go out, throwing people into total darkness. That's why having your own solar power is now more important than ever. And there it is, right on the screen. You can see it. Whoop, it flipped on me. But right in the screen right now. But that's why Laura and I take these steps for our family. You should too. With the Patriot Power Generator, you get a solar generator that doesn't install into your house because it's portable. You can take it with you, even use it inside. But it's powerful enough for your phones, medical devices, or even your fridge. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use the promo code TPP10 to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including the Patriot Power Generator. Folks, before I go on, I'll tell you right now, they have an incredible deal, the 3-month survival kit. which Laura bought and I bought several of, now is bundled with the solar generator for the price of the solar generator. Yeah, guys, that's like a $700 off the cuff savings without the promo code. You'll also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. And a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com, use the promo code TPP10 to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com. Use the promo code TPP10 to get yours today. And again, let's see real quick. Actually, let me see if I can grab that bundle. Let me show you. Look at this. There it is. And I was looking at it yesterday with Laura. I'm like, oh, definitely pulling the trigger. You kidding me? That because we buy them anyway. This is an incredible deal. TPP10 at checkout. All right. I don't know how long that's going to last. I would take advantage of it if you intend to get it. Also, as I always tell you, do not, especially with that 3-month kit, you're going to get all sorts of other stuff with it. You may want to see what you get first before you buy something like, say, a solar water purifier or a solar cell for your phone to charge your phone when the power goes out. You may wind up getting something in that kit for free, and you don't want to waste your 10% off discount on a purchase item like that, especially a lower ticket purchase item when you can end up getting it in your bundle. So that's the People's Pundit tip when it comes to 4 Patriots. All right. All right. Jam and Bean also has a great deal I want to tell you about. jamandbean.com. If you sign up for a new coffee subscription, throw some popcorn in there. You know it's delicious. All right. Use the promo code TPP40 at checkout. It will give you 40% off the subscription initially. And you will still get the People's Pundit 10% discount every month when your subscription renews. Again, this company, jamandbean.com, they are, first of all, owned and operated by patriots, but also absolute artists when it comes to roasting coffee. Again, jamandbean.com, use the promo code TPP40 at checkout to get 40% off that first initial subscription cost, and then you will still get the 10% on the renewals each month. Incredible deal. I don't know how much longer they're going to run it for. So if you're thinking about getting it, now is the time. All right. I want to show you something. And again, I think some of these endorsements we read you about on Wednesday. We read you about Congressman Stute, right? There's now been, I had another one up here. Oh, and for Derek Ann on locals, you got a great example of what I'm talking about right here with the influence. This guy loved Congressman Byron Donalds. Loved him. And his gorgeous wife called him at one point. Let's not forget, one of Florida's finest. Byron Donalds endorses Trump. This is his next tweet. Morally and intellectually vacant Erica Donalds, wife of pathetic Byron Donalds, so in the bag for Trump and working against Florida and Floridians, she can't even bring herself to mention Governor DeSantis leads the charge on these issues. Top it off, a family of dirtbags. That's textbook. Textbook. Great job, Derek. Great job. So let's see if I can get you this image. I want to see if I can get you this. It's not as big as I had hoped it would be. All right. But let's see if I can, I could still show it. We talked about the Florida delegations, right? With the Byron Donalds in here that endorsed Trump. You had the latest, the other day or yesterday. One was an absolute surprise. Anyway, you have all of these donors getting very shaky. They attacked DeSantis in the Financial Times. You had Peter Fye, right, which I told you was BS. He's lying when he says I'm no longer supporting DeSantis because DeSantis is too radical on abortion and radical on banning books. And folks, DeSantis has been on these issues for now. He's in his second term of governor. If you just now found out that Ron DeSantis doesn't like inappropriate material in the classroom, then you have been sleeping under a rock. If you just now found out that Ron DeSantis would absolutely, if the Florida legislature gave it to him, put it on his desk, sign a bill banning abortions pretty early in the pregnancy in Florida. Anyone who's ever driven on I-75 in the state of Florida, you will see billboard after billboard after billboard about anti-abortion. Right. I mean, this is so ridiculous to pretend like all of a sudden Ron DeSantis is too radical for this guy. He's so full of crap, it's not even funny. It's because I told you the meeting in Palm that happened was true. It happened. And they told him, if you don't pick it up in the polls, I'm out. And many of them even said, sadly, we like you and we don't want you to destroy yourself. If you lose to Trump, you're finished forever. You should really seriously reconsider this. Yeah, because, I mean, they're looking at Laura just said, ask Jeb. They're looking at Marco Rubio. They're looking at Jeb Bush. They're looking at Ted Cruz. Folks, Ted Cruz didn't even lose his own state. And it still ended his career as a presidential candidate. He'll never be considered for the presidency again. Neither will Marco Rubio. Losing in your own home state is a career ender. A career ender. Here's Michelle Goldberg for the New York Times. All right. And I put this nice little doohickey in here. Let me take 5. While we read it, I want you to think over what's happening here. The sickening deja vu of watching Trump manhandle DeSantis. Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, who was supposed to stop Donald Trump. Whoa. The New York Times sees Ron DeSantis as the vehicle to stop Donald Trump because they did. Because the media, the donors who hate Trump, the influencers who have basically been, not basically, this is something everyone needs to know. A lot of people, not everyone, there are just a lot of people out there in good faith supporting Ron DeSantis. That's true. But there have been a lot of people, consultants, influencers, who are basically expelled from Trump world. And they don't have a horse. But that's not them. They're, you have that group of people, but then you have like the Cuccinellis and the media, and they honestly would rather Joe Biden get another term, especially big donors like Ken Griffin and Bigelow and all these other Ricketts. Absolutely. They would rather Joe Biden get another term than Donald Trump be reelected to the presidency, especially a Donald Trump who has probably learned quite a lot from his mistakes and may end permanently their situation. They're trying to survive him. They can live under Joe Biden. Mitch McConnell would love the idea of a Joe Biden presidency and a Republican majority. He did. He loved it a lot more than the idea of a Donald Trump putting the normal operation of business on hold. So to them, they don't care. They have nothing to lose if Ron DeSantis runs and loses because they feel they could probably use DeSantis, Paul Ryan does, feels that he can use DeSantis to split MAGA and that they lose the general election anyway. Even if DeSantis was to beat Trump, they're going to lose the general election anyway because there's going to be a massive number, which we're going to show you again with the new poll. It's not going to have changed, folks. If anything, I wouldn't be surprised if the Trump or bust vote got bigger since we last polled. They know what's coming with mail-in voting. No matter who the Republican nominee is, they are going to have a monumental task in defeating Joe Biden. Read Larry Schweikert's Substack, which he interviewed me for, because look at Fetterman. It doesn't matter how weak Joe Biden is. Yes, he's historically very weak for a nominee. We talked to people in Pennsylvania who said crime was their number one issue, who also said that they believed that Oz would be better on crime than Fetterman, yet voted for Fetterman. It's a hive mind, and it's all being built and driven, or I would say it's all being taken advantage of, or, how could I put this better? Exploited. It's a hive mind being exploited by a massive vote-by-mail infrastructure that they have now fine-tuned even to the point where they can do a damn good job in a midterm that they should have been crushed in. The only way to beat it is to get a massive, very typical Republican, voters, massive turnout among them, and then also the what did Rush Limbaugh call them? Low propensity is another word for them. Low info is not the right word, so let's not get that out of your head. low propensity, low participation. They don't always vote. Going back to 2008 to the 2020 election, clearly people who will vote for Trump will not vote for anyone else, anyone. They just don't feel that it's worth participating in the process when it's just typical Republican versus typical Democrat. They don't care. They're not coming out for Nikki Haley. They're not coming out for Ron DeSantis. They're not coming out for Mike Pompeo. They're not coming out for Mike Pence. So to me, the only question is, who's got more to lose? Is the Trump or bust vote bigger than the never Trump vote? That's the only question that matters. And without a doubt, the Trump or bust vote right now dwarfs the never Trump vote. So that puts the inevitable nominee, eventual nominee for the Republicans in a very precarious situation, no matter who it is. And these people, the media, the New York Times, supposed to stop Trump. They love it. To them, this is golden. A nightmare would have been Ron DeSantis not running for president and just being on the VP shortlist like he was. That would have been their nightmare situation for them. That's why you have George Soros loving this, openly stating it, loving it. This is the best thing in the world if DeSantis runs for president. If DeSantis loses, you're going to have butthurt never Trumpers. If he wins, you're going to have a huge MAGA vote that doesn't vote. He's right. Listen, the guy isn't a billionaire because he's an idiot. No matter what you may think of George Soros, obviously a pretty smart guy. Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor who is supposed to stop Donald Trump, is deflating before even entering the race with his poll numbers softening and donors fretting. Linked both times there to back up things I have been telling you before anybody alerted you to it. Trump, meanwhile, seems more buoyed than hindered by his ever-proliferating scandals and is racking up endorsements at DeSantis' expense. Folks, what he did in this was an outflank of epic proportions. And it's growing by the day. So far, DeSantis has his former Secretary of State. Well, obviously. It was masterful. Love or hate Trump, you got to admit it. From 1,000 miles away, he poured cold water all over this guy. And donors are fretting. You should click on that story and show you. But the fact remains that this is what I'm talking about with how nasty some of them are. You come out on Twitter and you say, this is what is happening. And I just read it one for you. I mean, I'll say it again. This is a great, again, Derek, and great example. Great example. And I'm going to read it again just so. Can you, do you mind if I put it up there to show people? I don't want to show people if you don't want me to, like, because I know this was on Locals. But it's a perfect example. And I guess it's DeSimps posting their and I said it, I even said it last night on Twitter. I never use the term DeSimps. I don't insult people unless I have to, or in defending myself. But I haven't got into this DeSimp thing that I see Trumpers doing. I just, I do find the DeSantis thing kind of funny because I don't know who decides that you have a different last name 40 plus years into your life.
You can use it.
I can use it? Okay. So, I mean, it's not like we are... Oh, it's on Twitter. He's got the link there, too. And it's from this guy. Yeah, this is a really... But if I show on Locals, then I don't have to go to that. So, let me just put it on Locals. I mean, this is a great example. It's not like I'm highlighting the guy anymore, and not like I care anyway. But it's not like I'm highlighting him anymore because he's already been posted by that account, which is no doubt somebody who's a Trump supporter, trolling DeSantis supporters. But here it is, right? I mean, this is really something special here, folks. All right. And I know politics is a blood sport. It is. It's a full contact sport. I'm trying to get it in the middle here so you guys can see it. There's that. So that account, it's just something that's par for the course that comes with it. But look at this first. Here it is. Let's not forget one of Florida's finest. This is May 11th of 2022. Congressman Byron Donalds and his gorgeous wife. And then less than a year later, morally and intellectually vacant Erica Donalds. By the way, what she put is, I wonder what legislators of decades past think of the common sense protections that now require a law. Don't allow kids at sexual shows. This is a tweet that actually is supporting Ron DeSantis. It is. This is a tweet in support of him while he's being called a bigot and everything by leftists and transgender activists, right? And others. Here she is, Erica Donalds, the wife of Byron, supporting the governor of Florida. But this is what she gets in response. Morally and intellectually vacant Erica Donalds, wife of pathetic Byron Donalds, so in the bag for Trump and working against Florida and Floridians, she can't even bring herself to mention that Governor Ron DeSantis leads the charge on these issues. Seek your mirror, not mine. A family of dirtbags. What was the sin? Her husband endorsed Donald Trump. So she went from being the gorgeous wife of Florida's finest to being a pathetic wife of a pathetic Byron Donalds in a family of dirtbags. Jesus, folks. Stay classy, mother. Stay classy. You're lucky I pulled that back. Stay classy. Listen, you could be like, yeah, and DeSantis leads on these issues because he does. But you get attacked like that because you didn't mention DeSantis? This strategy of attacking and insulting is not going to win any votes. In fact, here's a big problem for DeSantis. One of, in the polling, Trump's biggest vulnerabilities. And I would argue it's not COVID. They think it's COVID because they took the political risk. And frankly, I think it's a gross miscalculation of trying to paint Ron DeSantis as the anti-lockdown governor. He was not. All right. Robert Barnes on the last episode of What Are the Odds thoroughly brought the receipts, thoroughly destroyed that narrative. That is simply untrue. Laura and I were there. We know it was untrue. He wasn't as bad as Andrew Cuomo, but that's not a very high bar to me, folks. I'm glad he came around for sure, and he did a lot of things right. One of the best things he did right was protect those girls against unfair competition from biological males who identify as females. Americans don't like that at all. By the way, great comment on Locals about how you reconcile that with Pew Research's findings, and I think that's a great topic that we need to discuss. I keep slipping my mind, but try to get Riley on the show again, and then that would be a great segment for that. But overwhelmingly, Americans didn't like that. He didn't need a poll. DeSantis didn't need a poll to tell him that. He knew that Floridians would find that to be insane, and Americans in general. So he did the right thing, and So there are a lot of good things, and you can say, she's defending him there. What she's saying is it's ridiculous that he even needed a law. But because she didn't mention him by name, and because her husband now has endorsed Donald Trump, that's what she gets in response. That's very typical. And here's again the problem. One of Trump's biggest vulnerabilities was personnel. And as Reagan said always, personnel's policy. And many Republican voters that we spoke to who were they supported the president. They support his presidency. They thought he was awesome, his agenda. The problem is the personnel issues were constantly stifling that agenda. And they didn't think, or they weren't convinced, or some of them were quite unsure that Trump had learned from those personnel lessons. So even if you won, it wouldn't really matter. Doing this, taking this tact, taking this strategy of insulting while surrounding yourself with the worst personnel choices possible, which you have your influence, your army of influencers who are nasty as all hell, and then you have people surrounding you from Bush world, Rove world, Ricketts world, Griffin world, Bigelow world. He killed himself. Politically killed himself. The real vulnerability for Trump was not COVID, because Donald Trump could always go back and say, I said the following: the cure cannot be worse than the disease, in March of 2020. 4 months later, you were fining business owners still, because it's true. They can't go after him on some of these issues that they thought they were going to be able to when it came to global leaders and world ally, relationships with allies. They can't go over that because he could always just pull up the letter we pulled up and showed you. And by the way, this is something I got to tell Dave Rubin. I mean, he's going on and on yesterday about, so now Trump, let me ask you, if DeSantis is a globalist, who else is a globalist? Like, I love Dave, but Dave, his signature, Dave, is right next to Adam Kinzinger's signature in the letter to then Secretary of State John Kerry, calling and pushing for what is now known, what we call the coup letter. So it's just, again, insulting the intelligence of voters is not the way you win votes. Saying you can't rehire Trump as the president because he's made bad personnel decisions, and then surround yourself with Bushies. And that hurt. That's why the vetting was a problem for him. And I told people it was more than just the indictment. It was more than just the indictment. It was the flip-flopping on Ukraine. It was the learning about who is stuffing the coffers. Voters are not dumb. They're not going to suddenly think somebody who takes money from Ken Griffin is going to make better personnel, and policy choices. Like, you're insulting their intelligence. And when it doesn't work, you insult them personally. It's a bad decision. I've seen this before. I've seen it before. We've been here before. And by the way, so is Michelle Goldberg at the New York Times. And actually, I would say that article's worth reading. It is. Even if you have to not be able to stand the scandal stuff, you have to just take that along with it. Read between the lines and see what they're really saying. Same thing with the USA Today poll of Robert Kennedy Jr. They are absolutely concerned. Yeah, when you pit Kennedy against Biden, I can tell you this, and you're gonna find out soon. He scored very low, like 2.5%, 3% in the national polling. Maybe he'll go up now because typically announcements give you temporary bumps. They don't always give you bumps. Typically, and most often, they're temporary. But when you pit him in the large crowded fields, we got like 2.5%, 3% for Robert Kennedy Jr. Before his announcement. Maybe you get a little bit higher now, but it's very clear that right off the bat, in a more head-to-head scenario, environment, where it's just him, someone else, or him, Marianne Williamson, someone else, versus Joe Biden, the weakness of Joe Biden really does come out, and Kennedy does get double digits. So it's very clear. Marianne Williamson, by the way, does not. He's got a famous last name. I think, that segment you saw on Tucker is going to make a lot of sense to people. And actually, I'll get that. I'll pull that up. We should watch that. Or at least parts of it, Laura, because I think he brings up, he really does illustrate what people think about Ukraine, how Americans are generally very compassionate and they're very generous. But when you get a little bit more specific with them and you say, but what about if it means this? What about if it means that? That's when they start to get more opposition. All right. So let's see. Should we play that first or should we do the thing first? Yeah, let's play it first. Let's do Kennedy's. Yeah. So when Kennedy is in a different setting, whether it be a state level or national polling, he gets more. And I don't want to play the whole thing, but I do want to play some so you guys can get an idea of what he said. And I'm going to skip around a little bit. All right. Let's do this. Let's do this. And then I'll finish what I was saying with the polling. All right. Because USA Today, before I start this, let me just tee it up with this. Very concerned, clearly. The pollster was like, listen, you can't laugh this guy off. And USA Today basically reports it and says, even though he's a huge conspiracy pusher when it comes to vaccines, he's that guy who pushed, vaccines cause autism in children. He's that guy who pushed all of these anti-Pfizer things. On multiple occasions, they called him a conspiracy theorist and tried to link him to vaccines because they know that Democratic voters specifically don't like that stuff. So, they thought that it would hurt him politically. It's very clear what USA Today was doing. Just as I criticized the Gateway Pundit for releasing polling results in Arizona that showed Kerry Lake up, Blake Masters up, and that was Signal, by the way, and then infecting the article with editorializations like, so clearly, if Kerry Lake loses or Blake Master loses, they stole the election. No pollster should allow, if not publicly object to, if the media company doesn't listen, they should never allow that in an article that reports their results. Results should be reported, period, plain and simple. That's all. Without any opinion or editorializing of any kind by the media outlet who hired you, the sponsoring outlet. And if it was me and L. Todd Wood at CD Media tried to do that in one of our polls last year, I'll tell you what, folks, I would have, if I could not get Todd to change his mind and remove it, I would have released a public statement that said, I do not agree with these comments and they are not appropriate to be in the article alongside the results. I'm telling you, I would have done that. USA Today is just as guilty as the Gateway Pundit. Because we're now going to trust we're now going to trust people like the Gateway Pundit or anybody, USA Today, in an article that's supposed to be about, data. We're now going to trust them to tell us which conspiracy theory is worse. Joe Biden launched his campaign on a conspiracy theory. There is a conspiracy theory and a hoax in his 2020 announcement video. Russia collusion and very fine people. Which one's worse? One causes vaccine hesitancy. The other one caused a nutcase to pick up a firearm and shoot the House Majority Whip and 4 other people. Which one's worse? Conveniently, USA Today left out the one that they helped to push. Both. We found articles with the very fine people hoax and Russia collusion being pushed in USA Today. So, you know what? Shame on you, pollster, for not coming out and saying that that was not appropriate. The results are the results. It's for the voters to decide. That's narrative building. That's telling the public what to think. That's shaming the double-digit support that Robert Kennedy Jr. had in that poll. That's what they were trying to do. You idiots, don't you know he's an anti-vaxxer? That's social bias campaigning. That's an attempt to get people to support Joe Biden, not an attempt to demonstrate with a scientific survey who supports him and who doesn't. That's weaponizing polling. Now I'm going to shut up and let Robert Kennedy talk about it here.
Today, it wasn't about pharma even so much as it was about America's place in the world and what do we do about it. If you wouldn't mind summarizing for our viewers where you think we are.
And I cut it off because Tucker says, the media made him out to be some kind of crazy anti-vaxxer.
And what you think we ought to do.
Well, I gave a long speech, Tucker, and thank you again for having me on.
Of course.
And for that very kind of an introduction. I think that the general theme of my speech was this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is turning our country into a corporate kleptocracy, into a system of socialism for the rich, and this kind of a cushy socialism for the rich, and this kind of brutal, merciless capitalism for the poor. It keeps us in a state of war. It bails out banks at the same time that last month, the United States government told 30 million people it was cutting their food stamp checks by 90%. It took 15 million people off of Medicare. The same month, it gave $300 million to the Silicon Valley Bank and tapped up the cost of the Ukraine war to 113 billion. We're sending 113 billion to the Ukraine. The entire budget of EPA is 12 billion. The budget of CDC is 11 billion. We have 57% of American citizens could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. A quarter of our citizens are hungry. So we're cutting welfare and food stamps by 90%. And we're bailing out the bankers. We're paying for a war that, we can't afford. And with the way that we do this is by printing money. We've printed 10 centuries of money in the last 14 years. And that caused the inflation, which raises food, which is a tax on the poor. We've raised food prices for basic foods like chicken, dairy, and milk by 76% in the last 2 years. And now we're cutting people's food stamps and bailing out banks the same month. It doesn't make any sense. And we need to get rid of this kind of corporate control of our government. It comes from our democracy is devolving into kind of a corporate plutocracy.
I would define it more as a much closer to fascism, because of fascism, of course, is dictatorship or control of labor and resources over what is or appears to be a private economy. But I do understand what he's saying, that it really isn't a simple one thing for everybody. It is like comfy socialism, as one commenter said, and it was on YouTube. It is a comfy kind of socialism for the rich. And then this like brutal fascist, economy down below. And why do I say fascist? Because they are trying to coerce behavior as well. So that's the difference between a socialism and fascism. And fascism is a form of socialism, but a communism and other forms of socialism, and if they were owned by the private sector, and parts of the private sector were owned by the government, that would be communism. This is more like a fascist state, or at least it is for the rest of us, where it is very much a comfy kind of socialism for the ruling class and the rich. I like how he did that, and I'm telling you right now that's going to resonate, despite and I hear I hear what you're saying when it comes to the speech stuff. His father was also somebody very awkward. He got better as time went on. There's a Netflix documentary right now, if you want to check it out. It's about RFK. So it's actually pretty neat. So let's see. Oh man, you got to be kidding me! Somebody just come on. Anyway, I know, and I'm trying to be nice, folks. I see your comments. I'm trying to be nice to certain people. I'm not someone who's just an outward, for the sake of it. I think that some of them are being misled, all right, and for financial interests and other interests. But back to this. I think that I want to fast forward a little bit here and get to something he talks about when he talks about Ukraine, because I think if he does work on this approach or his delivery, then he can appeal to quite a few people. I really do. I think this is, people would dismiss him at their own peril. It's when you're the Biden White House or any incumbent, it is very easy to, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very easy to push and scare people out of the field. Okay. When that person doesn't owe you anything, right? So yeah, he's not going to get endorsements from congressmen and senators like crazy because Biden's going to scare the hell out of them, put them all in line. And that's what's happening, except for one congressman in Minnesota. We've talked about it before. But for the most part, that's not going to stop his appeal to the public. What is what he was just talking about. And Tucker even brought it up. He only made it on Tucker. He's not going to make it on many other Fox shows. Why? Because Fox takes money from Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies that RFK has gone after during the pandemic. They're advertisers. Tucker said advertisers. He's talking about Pfizer. Pfizer has grown enormously powerful under the pandemic. They've littered K Street with lobbyists, and they are super cozy with newsrooms now. And because of RFK's position on the lockdowns in many respects and on vaccines, certain vaccines, I mean, he actually, despite what people have been saying, I went back because I'm vetting him. I went back and I found quite a bit on him about, people should want to get vaccinated. People should get vaccinated. The most people should on several different vaccinations. It's just that he's taken issue with certain vaccines and at what time we get them in our life cycle. That's what he's taken issue with, not vaccines themselves, but it doesn't matter. And because there is this like incestuous relationship, very fascist-like, between the state and corporations, they're going to prevent him from getting on television. That's going to happen, without a doubt. All right, so let's go forward a little bit and see about when he's talking about Ukraine. I may have went a little too far. I may bust it around a little bit here. Give me a second.
And sort of diplomatic, the most respected diplomatic gurus like Henry.
Yep.
People, the major doyens, sort of diplomatic, the most respected diplomatic gurus like Henry Kissinger and Jack Matlock and Larry Wilkinson have all said the Ukraine war is a huge problem for our country because from a geopolitical standpoint, it's driving the Russians close to the Chinese, which is the worst thing for us. But we're there for the right reasons because we have tremendous compassion for the Ukrainian people and the illegal invasion, the brutality, and also their valor and their courage. My own son was serving over there. He joined a special forces unit as a machine gunner. He fought in the Kharkiv offensive. Americans care about the underdog. They care about that kind of suffering. But the question is,
right. And he brought it up a little bit more before too. I just can't play the whole clip, but that's what really comes at the heart of it, and why, if you poll them the way that Newsweek poll polled them, yeah, I do want them in NATO. Sure, they're the underdog. I want them to have a better quality of life. I want the human condition to be better around the world. I don't want it to be what we've seen. Of course, they don't know. It's not widespread knowledge about how dangerous the Ukrainian government has been to certain elements of its population. I mean, they've been killing people for 8.5 years. They were literally shelling innocent people. Most people don't really realize that. They just digest and regurgitate Western political media, propaganda. They don't know the whole story, but instinctively, RFK is right here. Instinctively, they like the underdog. They feel bad. They defer to rights. They are anti-discrimination. They don't like it in the very general sense. However, if you said what RFK is about to get into here, do you support this at the cost of us prosecuting a war against another great power with nuclear weapons? They're out. They're out, folks.
Why are we in the Ukraine? Because Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, said that we're there to exhaust the Russians. President Biden has said that we're there to deplatform, to depose Vladimir Putin. And if that's why we're there, and we're killing a lot of Ukrainians as pawns in a proxy war between two great powers. Here's one last thing I would say. Right. Nobody talks about this. There's 14,000 Ukrainian civilians who have died, but 300,000 troops. The Russians are killing Ukrainians at a 7-to-1 to 8-to-1 ratio. They cannot sustain this. What we're being told about this war is just not true.
No, it's not true. And I would hope, despite the fact you criticize their advertisers, other media outlets would have enough respect for our country and for its voters to give what you said a hearing, because I think it's really important. And we're, again, grateful that you came on our show tonight. You're always welcome.
But of course, they don't respect you enough. They don't respect you at all. And they will not give any attention to what he's saying whatsoever. And they're going to do their damnedest to make sure you don't know about it. Just like they did their damnedest to make sure you did not know about the Hunter Biden laptop. Because, to borrow Michelle's phrase there, it was like deja vu for them all over again in 2020. Oh my God. If this gets out, he's about to get Hillary Clinton. The shine will come off. He'll be just another pay-for-play corporate Democrat like Hillary Clinton, and Michigan's going to Trump. Let's get to some of your questions. Oh, actually, it's 1:25. Let's get to our break, and then we will be done with our questions, and then we'll be able to focus more and solely on your questions. Got some really good ones in there, too, I'm seeing. So give me, a hot minute. Summertime's here, folks. Summertime's here. Don't you want to get healthy? I do. Tried all these different diets, tried all of these different supplements, and that just didn't work out for me. Junk science. That's what the doctors will call them. And why? Because many of these fruit and vegetable supplements, Laura and I have tried in the past, they use extracts of common produce department fruits and vegetables that have few health benefits. That's why I take Field of Greens, because it's the whole organic fruit and vegetable, not a watered-down supplement, and it's backed by a better health promise. Each ingredient in Field of Greens was scientifically chosen to support vital organs like your heart, lungs, and kidney health. Others support my immune system, blood pressure, metabolism, and, for summer, healthy weight loss. I don't eat as healthy as I should. Who does? But that's why I take Field of Greens. And like me, you'll probably look and feel healthier, fast, and have way more energy. But your best proof will be when you're at your next checkup and your doctor says, whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep it up. Let's get started with 15% off today for you. Fieldofgreens.com. Use the promo code TPP. That's promo code TPP at fieldofgreens.com. Different flavors, berry, lemon lime, and then unflavored. You could throw in your favorite drink, maybe a Body Armor. Works for me. Let me give you a little hint. While you will feel better fast and you will notice benefits, keep it up. 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in. You'll start to see even more benefits. Skin, hair, energy, lasting, more sustainable. It's not like a 5-hour power. Right? So there it is. Fieldofgreens.com, promo code TPP. All right. Yep, 2 competing polls out today. One from Tony Fabrizio. Good pollster, without a doubt. Shows close races at the presidential level. Shows DeSantis doing a little bit better than Trump. Registered voter sample done by phone, a lot of it too, which, it is how you mix the mode. I will say this, it's one of the ones that saw some weirdness with. He did poll for Trump, although he never really liked Trump. So I think people should know that. And then you have the Harvard-Harris poll, also did very good job last year. And they have Trump expanding his lead over Joe Biden, DeSantis doing worse. All right. And then in the primary, a 35-point lead for Trump, with Trump now well into the mid to high 50s. So listen, what do I think about that? They're both close. And, they're both. That's not true. They both show that the Republican candidates are doing fairly similar against Joe Biden. They're not close in their overall impression of the race. And I am more inclined, and I'm telling you this, I'm more inclined to take the Harvard poll with a little bit more substance and weight, because I know from my own polling what I'm seeing. And that's because they're both registered voter polls, that's without the likely voter model. There's a couple of things still happening. There is just this vote that will, and you're not going to see it in a registered voter sample. You'll see it, but it won't be reported in a registered voter sample. There are people who will vote for Trump and then be undecided for DeSantis. So all I see is Joe Biden doing a little bit less because some people don't know who DeSantis is. And like Mark Mitchell, who from Rasmussen, we brought on to talk about this. Those demographics are the most, what he called, and I agree 100%, skeptical or suspect demographics. They're going to vote for Joe Biden. It's going to happen. All right. So the only question is, well, it's the question I said before. Which group of people is bigger? Never Trump or bust. Because I'll tell you right now, the only way Republicans are going to overcome this vote by mail operation that Democrats have built and are continuing to build is by having a turnout monster. Because the more you vote, the more turnout you get, the more you take off the table for them to fortify. And they will. Whether it's legal or not. Whether they're paying a single mother $500 to go out and ballot harvest with low propensity voters. Or it's something more sinister. Signatures that don't match or something. That's whatever you may think it is or whatever it may turn out to be. They're going to do it. So your only hope as a Republican candidate is to massive turnout to be able to counter that. Why? Because you should really have two things going on. One, an attempt to get massive turnout, and then two, building your own harvesting operation. But believe me when I tell you, donors, bundlers, they're not smart enough to see it on the Republican side. Left-wing donors are. Republican donors are not. It has not gone well. In fact, I kind of exploded on one with a pretty well-known gubernatorial candidate a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to get into it. Normally, I don't lose my temper. I lost my temper. I did. I was like, I just can't. How could you be so stupid? How could you be so dumb? How many more times do you like to get your asses kicked? This is about, for Republicans, this is about access still. Republican donors, and by the way, like I said, go check out Larry Schweikert's Substack. There's a pretty funny article with me in it. He called me and he wanted to write an article about it. And the point I was making was his question surrounded whether or not some light for Republicans at the end of the tunnel is that COVID's not around anymore and there won't be this massive push. And I basically told him nonsense. And despite the fact that Joe Biden is weak, I used the Fetterman example. But I got in a lot more detail. The only thing that Republicans should be thinking about right now is building that infrastructure. They don't have the first clue on how to do it. And most of them, you can't even get them to see the wisdom in doing it. It's really rather sad. But they're still playing a game of, but I want to give to DeSantis, but I want to give to Trump. I want to give to this one. I want to give to that one because if they win, I want to be able to pick up the phone and I want access. 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 It's like they want to feel important. Always, Laura. Always. Laura is right. The right suffers from Messiah syndrome. Whether it's donors or candidates, it's like they don't know how to operate for the greater good of their cause. The left does. And maybe that's because they're communal by nature, collectivist by nature. But still, we're not talking about being collectivists here. We're talking about having a brain big enough to understand that you cannot do in 10 hours what your opponents are doing in 2 weeks or more in Minnesota or more in now Michigan. The stuff Laura and I found, man, that stuff was in motion since September. So when you have Joe Biden having a dementia moment and accidentally going, we're building the biggest operation in the country. He wasn't lying. So it's now more than just a game of persuasion. And of course, persuasion is still a part of it. But it's not enough. It's a game of harvesting. It's a very unsexy, super unsexy, boring race. It's not a horse race anymore. It's not. That's what it is. Frankly, quite amazing what Democrats were able to pull off in 2022. All the ingredients for a major Republican wave were right there. Every pollster knows it. Every pollster saw it. And then, God forbid, Every pollster had Kerry Lake ahead. All they had to do was throw one wrench into the election day machine. And you don't have time, 8 hours, 10 hours, to fix it. It's too late. You lose an hour and a half of voting in the morning at high enough rates, and it's the election. So what should have been a fairly easy 4-point win ended up being a narrow loss. Now, there were multiple angles that they used against her in the Republican ticket, but it's a perfect example. Their data latency problem, database latency issue is systemic, and it's unbelievably bad. I can't tell you how much time we spend matching records. The data is so bad. People always said to me, this guy isn't a friendly. He works with leftists. I work with anybody who's got the best software, the best data. I want to be well informed. I don't care what political persuasion they are.
Remember that one company that was going on trying to pitch you and like, we work with a lot of left, and then you were like,
I was gonna say it. That was Dynata.
You said that out loud.
Who I love. I do. But I get this call. Dynata's been buying up a lot of our stuff, software. They're a good company. They've been like MarketSite. They bought MarketSite. Anyway, it had been a while since we had a relationship with them with their online panel, because we just build, what's great is that they can dedupe against a voter file, which is like a must for us. So if we're going to have online respondents, we need to know who they are on the voter file. Consumer panels are problematic. All right. So we try to know as much information about people as possible. And if they give us a vote history, we want to know whether they're telling the truth or if they're even a voter. Look, unfortunately, YouGov and others, Morning Consult and others, I don't know if they do it anymore at Morning Consult like this, but if you're incentivizing people to like earn points towards a Kohl's gift card, then you could get some girl who's 18 years old and trying to go to college and needs extra money or something, or needs to buy extra stuff, and she has no intention of voting. Maybe she's not even registered to vote, but she's going to tell you yes so she can get those points for that survey. We do not believe in that. We've always believe that there has to be some kind of validation, like the census, when they'll do and the Pew Research, every time they do their exit polls, their post election studies and exit polls, those are voter verified. And you'll notice how different they are from the pre-election polls. And it's very different. So, at the end of the day, we have philosophical differences, and I hadn't been around in a while, and they called me up and basically were like, hey, we work with a lot of left-wing people, and I'm like, well, I know you're not my normal account manager, but this is the People's Pundit. He stopped so dead in his tracks, man. Or progressive. He didn't say left-wing. He was like, we work with a lot of progressive pollsters like you. And I was like, whoa.
He stuttered so
I was
bad.
like, I'm an independent pollster, number one. Number two, I think most people in this industry would probably put me on the right-wing side, right? And then he was like, oh, right, Laura? And he was like, once he realized who he was talking to.
Oh, he was like, oh, dear. I was like, oh, yes.
I did initially tell him I wouldn't blow him up, but listen, it's not a secret. That's part of his pitch, his transcript.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not really blowing him up. I just was a little bit shocked because my prior account manager, who I love her, there was no injection of partisanship at all in these studies. At all.
No, she was awesome.
She was awesome. And remember,
so's this other person. It's just
we don't like talking about politics with the vendors. You just don't do that. You just don't do it. Everybody knows the industry is dominated largely by leftists, but there's no reason to bring that up at all. And ironically, the industry didn't ever close or turn a blind eye to the issues that polling was having leading up until 2016, because it was before 2016 we had these issues. It's just that it was a presidential election and it finally bopped. So they, it became a subject, that people had to address now. But NATO was on it for a long time. Back then, they were called something else, SSI and Samplify or something like that. I don't know, but they had a number of different names. And using Aristotle, we were like doing these voter file dedupes and matches, checking out the electorates between our panels and online phone polls. And it wasn't even close. I mean, because we were matching to the voter files, we knew who was going to vote better than media and university polls did. So it was great, a breath of fresh air. It is not the way it is when you see like 5 turd fake and others debate on Twitter who's a real pollster, who's a right leaning pollster, a left leaning pollster. It's just not how the industry works. It's just, and thank God for that. All right, let me see how much I can get to. Tome, the regime's entire argument about Russia being the aggressor was predicated on their word that Ukraine was not going to join NATO and get nukes. What a joke our leaders are. Exactly. And thank you for the Rumble rant. Exactly. Folks, my God, they really love how sometimes people forget about historical context, right? And remembering stories in a fact pattern, a coherent fact pattern that respect the historical context. The entire point, to Tone, absolutely. The entire point. And by the way, Steve just texted me, Laura. He wants to make sure Monday is done. He said, whatever you do, make sure Monday is done. All right. He wants them Monday.
Copy.
The regime's entire argument about Russia being the aggressor was that. Exactly. Good for you, Tone. Good for you. Jonathan, thanks for the tip. What is Trump's potential popular vote electoral college ceiling? 312, I think, is realistic. I really do. I don't see any other Republican getting out of the 270s. I don't. It would be a bare electoral vote win for another Republican if they were to get turnout right. They would probably be somewhere around even still with the popular vote. There is a situation where Republicans can win the popular vote and lose the electoral college, win it by about 2 points and lose the electoral college. There's also under Trump a scenario where he can lose the popular vote by 4 points, but win the electoral college. But that would be a bare electoral college win. He loses by about 2 or wins by about 2, then you're talking about 300 plus electoral votes. The ceiling really, if you put, well, because Minnesota could go under the right circumstances. I don't care what people say about how it voted in 2020. I remember I polled it perfectly, flawlessly. Biden, we overstated Biden by maybe a point or 2 points, but it was still very close to what the actual outcome was. And that was not because of some rigid partisanship or some huge shift among white suburban women. Yes, that's becoming a problem in Olmsted and obviously in the Twin Cities area. But Trump could do better with them now, just like any other Republican could do. That's not the question. The question is, will the Iron Range finally come along? He expanded his appeal in the Iron Range. But there was something that happened in parts of Minnesota, to include the Western conservative part of Minnesota. We asked that question. It jumped right out of me. Let me see if I can get the actual wording of that question. I don't know. I know I'm running out of time here. But, well, it basically asked a series of questions because we know these states are very economic nationalists and they're anti-war, but they're also anti-corporations, right? And they view the Democratic Party as the party of the little guy still. Why? Because in Minnesota, the Democratic Party is a separate entity than the National Democratic Party. And they have done a phenomenal job keeping Democrats at bay, that national nutcase syndrome they're on, keeping them at bay. They don't act like that in Minnesota, okay? And so Biden was viewed as less likely to start a new conflict. He was, more viewed as cares about the issues that face people like me or cares about me. That's not the case anymore. Also, there was a strategic blunder there. This is part of Trump's personnel issues. They did not believe Trump could carry Minnesota, and he absolutely can carry the state of Minnesota. So they put a lot of investment in it when Brad Parscale was there before he went off on the deep end, and then they abandoned it. Here's what happened. When the Democratic Party of Minnesota noticed that Trump under Brad Parscale was trying to put boots on the ground, trying to put a serious investment in the state, they reacted and they went nuts. And then there was also some screws that were put to union members who stepped off the reservation in 2016. And that is true of Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. There were now consequences for union members in the private and public sectors voting out of lockstep. You didn't support Biden, somehow they were going to find out and come after you. And I'm telling you that I know that's the case. We spoke to many people, and they were much more involved for Biden this time because there's only one organization I know, one group that has the reach that we saw that could have done what we saw being done when it comes to vote by mail. And it has to include both private and public sector unions. There's just no other way. You get that many people to obey. All right? It's the only organization I could see that could do it. And they're the only ones who have the organization and the power, that kind of reach. All right? So, but again, I think that Trump's electoral vote ceiling is bigger because of the Rust Belt. I hate to pop everybody's bubble. No other Republican is going to compete in the Rust Belt. It's just not going to happen. Do I have to play the friggin' UFC clip? It's like amazing to me that and again, this is something they can't answer, so they just attack. No Republican carried Michigan and Pennsylvania since 88. No Republican carried Wisconsin since 84. What in your right mind tells you that the one who is trying to beat the one guy who did is going to somehow do it when all else failed? And locals, you know this because we had this specifically, exclusively on locals. You're not winning Wisconsin unless you are in the 70s with evangelicals and you increase their share of the vote. Not even George W. Bush can do that. That's why he fell a couple thousand votes shy his second go around. 58% with the evangelicals is not going to cut it. And you saw on locals, you saw what everybody's margin was with evangelicals. Why is Trump a little bit higher? Because he gets non-white evangelicals. Others do not. He gets gangbuster of white evangelicals, juices their turnout, and he also gets non-white evangelicals, particularly in urban centers, which is why he does so much better than other Republicans, including the ones that you all just saw underperform in 2022. Walker in Fulton County. Purdue, by the way, in the special election in Georgia, did worse than Trump in the Atlanta metro area. That's why. He's got a bit of a secret weapon that expands. It's like the Republicans kill themselves because if all those never Trumpers would just like shut up, you know, and they've been doing everything they can to tear the party apart for years. If they would just vote for their nominee the way they voted for him in 2016, even though some of them went off the reservation then, you can't be beat. You cannot be beat. But when 8 to 12% of you abandon your own nominee and 5% Democrat, do the same, you're going to lose. All right. So it's really very simple. The problem is they want their 8% to count more than literally 15%, maybe 20%. It's dwarfed. All right. So, also, when we talk about that, and I'm going to spend so much time, but it's a great question. When we talk about that question that we ask in our national polling, who did you vote for in 2020? Right? Now, who would you vote for? That 10% shift to 12% shift, it's usually anywhere between 8 to, I think the highest was 14 or something. that say they would vote now for Trump after voting for Biden, and Trump is less than 2%. I mean, it's paltry. It's nothing. It's statistically insignificant. That shift is going to do damage in Wisconsin. That's going to do damage in Michigan. That's enough. Michigan, Pennsylvania, it's enough. It's over. The states are going. No other candidate can claim that they even have a prayer to do that, because you can't win with just consolidating the Republican base. Mitt Romney did that just fine. He also won independents modestly, but he won them. It wasn't enough because of what Sean Trende called the case of the missing white voter. Well, it's more than the case of the missing white voter now, in case you weren't paying attention in 2022. It's the case of the missing Trump voter. Juror, why isn't Turkey blocking this? You know, I was thinking the same. That's a really good question. I was thinking the same thing. Why wouldn't they, for instance, why wouldn't they, ratify it and then, block it, right? Like get in, become, full-fledged. I don't know, Juror. I don't know. To block NATO. I don't know. But I think Turkey's gonna bounce NATO. I do. I think they've always been kind of like, even before they were a de facto member, kind of like Ukraine is now. I don't know. We'll see. Probably because they're hedging their bets. We're in a bit of a state of limbo when it comes to the balance of power right now. And if you're a nation state, you don't want to end up on the wrong side of it. So potentially their thinking is the U.S. could still come out on top of this thing. So maybe we don't piss them off too much yet, but we keep our doors open and ready to flee to the China-Russo, coalition. I just can't believe we're this stupid. And we are. You remember the show? And I brought up Eli Lake's article, and he's like, we're just going to have to accept we're in a new Cold War with this Russian, China, and probably Indian alliance. And at the time, I said, no, it's going to be a China-Russian-India alliance if this keeps up. And guess what, stupid? We don't have a prayer to balance against them. We don't have a snowball's chance, and you know what? What we get out of this? Finland, we're going to get Sweden. Great. Like I've always said, they're going to throw snowballs at the Russians. And by the way, I'm not even sure we could take some of these people on our own anymore. We couldn't beat sandal-wearing goat herders in Afghanistan. We're going to take on the Spetsnaz? I know people were laughing about my tweet before, but is that before or after we're done painting our helmets rainbow color? Are you serious? Resolve means a lot in war. And don't give me the difference in the Russian versus American population. Our population means nothing as far as what's potential and latent power, military power. Less than 1% defending the rest of us, and they're not even really combat ready anymore. A draft would result in a lot of deferments. That's it. What I'm saying is these other nations have a better ratio of latent power or potential power to raw military power. All right. And that's keeping the economics out of it. They just do. It's a really good question, though. Why isn't Turkey blocking this? Anyone remember how hard they pushed the, quote, Trump is unstable, who can't work with other leaders line? Exactly. And that stuff worked in Minnesota, in New Hampshire, in parts of Pennsylvania. It worked. Didn't work in Ohio, but it certainly worked in areas they needed it to work. Absolutely. And now, by the way, these voters don't have a hypothetical to compare to. Now they remember the way it was. I mean, the Peter Baker of the New York Times just wrote an article that was so damning to Biden. He was like, under Biden, the negotiation tables are empty. Under Trump, we almost had a nuclear deal with North Korea, with the Abraham Accords. We went nuts when he got out of the Paris Accords. Yet, he had his own thing going on. Nothing really happened. Went nuts over NATO has to pay their fair share. All that happened was NATO started paying their fair share. They did not engage in acts of aggression against other great powers and cause a new balancing coalition to replace the Warsaw Pact. Great job. When Peter Baker is lamenting that you're a failure as a foreign policy president, you got a problem if you're a Democrat. Can you ask Rich how he thinks the Ukraine situation fallout affects the election in 2024? I do think on the presidential scale, Ukraine will have some marginal, if any, impact, but I think it will be part of a general theme, that what we hear from voters, that the world just seems to be headed, in a spiral. It's out of control. And why are you paying? Listen to what Robert Kennedy said. This is how much we have given now totally to Ukraine. Joe Biden just proposed another package to replace the SAMs they lost, right? Surface-to-air missiles and other air defense systems. And yet we're cutting food stamps. And yet this many millions were just booted off of Medicare. I'm telling you that while Ukraine gets this money, it's over 10 times, sometimes 15 times the budget of federal agencies like the CDC. If you really wanted to prepare for, a pandemic better, wouldn't you prioritize that instead of spending money we don't have, all leading to inflation, which is a tax on the poor? So I think that's really what it's going to come down to. Eric, still haven't seen anyone address the question why the U.S. shouldn't have tried to lower the price of oil to hurt Putin's oil revenues and help Americans at home. Because it's their ideology, Eric, which isn't even an ideology. It's a faith. They hate fossil fuels. They're okay to tap them when they're in eastern Ukraine, the shale deposits that he sent his son to go secure with, by the way, an investment, $2 billion by you, the U.S. taxpayer. But at home, they're obeying the people who are their special interests, which is green energy, not fossil fuels. The only people Joe Biden put in his administration that are energy people, like all fossil fuel people, are people who know energy development in other parts of the world, like Asia and Europe. They're not domestic producers. So I expected this fully, but Eric, they can't bring it up because the fact of the matter is they don't have a good answer. The only good answer is because I don't believe in God and I worship this ideology. And I can't violate the tenets of that ideology. From Getter, are you going to have a question about second choices? Would love to see the numbers on how many other candidates will move to Trump, DeSantis once they drop out. Thank you for asking that question. We started with that when we did some of the private stuff, and I stopped it because it was very clear. And this was a major, fatal even flaw in the DeSantis campaign strategy. And yes, there are campaigns, so I'm just calling them that. All right. The Washington Post once wrote an article lamenting about it as well. DeSantis's pitch has always been to donors, and the influencers have always tried to say and make a case that they just got to get him one-on-one. DeSantis has to just get Trump one-on-one and he can beat Trump. First of all, there was never any polling evidence to suggest that was true. Not in the universe, consensus of polling. Yes, they had their push polls pretending that was true, but it was not true. Now he's getting killed head to head. This is something that I looked at and would hear their arguments and not understand when I looked at our second choices. At the point we had Trump at his lowest level, 43%, and we had DeSantis, okay, at 30%. And then Nikki Haley like at 7 or 8, Mike Pence, right? At that point, what Team DeSantis wanted people to believe, and donors believed it, ironically, is that 6-7%, remember there are sampling errors in polls, that somehow, once everybody dropped out, it was going to result in DeSantis getting 20.01, meaning everybody that's undecided, and preventing Trump from gaining 6-7% out of the other candidate's support. It was a ludicrous argument. Trump has the easiest path to get to 50.1. That's number one. Obviously, it's a much clearer path. He has 7 points. DeSantis has 20 points. Much clearer path. DeSantis wasn't everyone's second choices. DeSantis was among Haley's supporters. DeSantis was the second choice of about 7 in 10. All right. I mean, DeSantis was the second choice between 70 and 80% of Haley's voters. But everybody else, the second choice was Donald Trump. Vivek, almost all of his support was Donald Trump. Mike Pompeo, almost all of his second choice support was Donald Trump. Mike Pence, 60-something% of his support was Donald Trump. Even, this is the major problem that really people should be considering right now. For Donald Trump supporters, many of them would vote for DeSantis. That is ticking down now because of their own actions. They're killing themselves with the Trump vote. But everyone who supports DeSantis almost would have voted for Donald Trump. So the only risk was how many Trump voters would not vote for Ron DeSantis. That's why we changed it from a second choice to the way we're phrasing it now. That was a great question on Getter, because I've already seen the dynamic of the second choice. When it comes to Iowa, when we poll Iowa, you're going to see that we will do something very much like that. Nevada as well, if we poll Nevada, because they're caucuses. And we're going to release results that are very different from how other people do it. We did this in 2016 quite a bit, where we would say, are you committed? Is that it? Or can you change your mind during the caucus? Because there are no such thing as exit polls for a reason in Iowa. There are entrance polls. And it's like, I'm going in and I'm thinking of voting for this person. But by the way, who's your second choice? And then from there, I think it gives a much more accurate projection on who's potentially going to end up the winner and what range of outcomes can we expect. So for me, great question. The short answer, after all that long answer, the short answer is because we already kind of know that. So if I feel like it's possible things will change, then I would love to check that out. But right now, I think it's more important to find out who is going to be able to draw the largest general election support. And that, to me, shows the real risk. Trump very clearly has most of the party. And I would, at this point, think it's going to be pretty hard. If we were to do second choices right now, I think DeSantis is capped at like 33%. I really do. Now, that could change. But it seems to me every move they make hurts more. That's why I told people, and I'm going to say this again, this wait until he announces argument is total bull shnikey. Announcements typically, historically, result in temporary bumps, and then a candidate is vetted. They either rise, or they fall under the pressure of that vet after the bump. Everything we have seen so far, his bungling of the indictment, his bungling of Ukraine, his bungling of his donor questions, his bungling of everything, suggests that DeSantis is not, and that's what Michelle is making the case in the New York Times article. It's not just me, folks. These are long-held Democratic strategists. Did you hear what's his name? Old James Carville? This is a smack, he said. He wasn't ready. You can see it every time. There's always someone who's a great governor, and then they hit national stage and they're not ready to be punched in the mouth. And that's what happened. And they screw up because their initial instinct is run to the consultants. I need them to tell me what to do. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Instead of just being authentic in themselves. Authenticity classes is a huge tip off, folks. Come on. When you're sitting there trying to learn how somebody else moves their hands, you might have a core issue. Voters aren't dumb. Don't insult them because it's not working on them. You know? Why is Larry Elder throwing his hat in just campaigning for VP? I honestly think that he's just trying to raise his profile. I really do. I think he's going to, again, Larry Elder's another example of somebody who could just wind up hurting himself. Why? Because they're afraid of Trump's non-white appeal. And they figure this is how, honestly, this is how tone deaf many Republicans are. They think by simply, some of them are supporting it because they feel by simply throwing a black man in the race, he's going to somehow compete with the guy who draws the most non-white support. I think this could really end up hurting Larry Elder. I like Larry, but he could really hurt himself here. You couldn't win the governor's race in California on a recall. You had a chance to support some candidates. You said you were going to use that money that you still had on hand to support congressional candidates. He didn't. He repeatedly endorsed the more establishment Kevin McCarthy aligned candidate over Trumpists. What's his name? Come on here. Don't. North of David, Laura. Kevin Kiley. They threw that guy in the race just to try to stop Kevin Kiley from winning the Republican nomination. Larry Elder backed him. So did Kevin McCarthy's people. And Kiley won, but I mean, some of the decisions by Elder just didn't seem to make any sense. You know, I mean, if you're claiming to be MAGA, you're working against MAGA. Are you going to have questions? Oh, did that already? Yes. There may come a point where the second choice option is appropriate to put back in, especially as we get closer. I do think that's very foreseeable. But the national polling, what is the latest? What's the breakdown in the Republican primary by ancestry? It's up there. The list is up there, but you're going to get new results very soon. So, but white ethnicity, ethnic origin, Hispanic ethnic origin, that's up there right now. So is Asian, but it's, some of them have very small samples, but where'd I lost it? Where'd I go? Personnel issues. Rich can put in a good word for me. The DOD will never be as Trump with me. I produced the receipts for 20 years. Message traffic, so I know where to look. Whoa, that's pretty funny. You and Mike Davis both. Let's see real quick while I'm reading all the questions, because I know we're over the limit already. Let's look at Getter. Let's look at Twitter, see where we are on these results and on locals. Locals, we are at... I got so many locals tabs up. All right, we're at... Let me refresh it. Guys, the locals community is way bigger than this. This isn't a premium post. Anybody can vote in it. You got, I don't know, less than a day left. Tomorrow morning, I think it ends. Poll, national or state nominations regarding the presidential primaries. Are you more interested in national or state polls at this time? National polls on locals. And I'm going to combine them all when it's over. I'm going to combine them all, and I'm going to put them up there. Well, let me show you locals, and then I'll bring the other ones in. So locals is at... Dun, 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 dun. Come on now. Locals. Overwhelming interest in state polls so far for locals. 68.9% said state polls. 20.6% said national polls. 10.5% were unsure. Getter. 204 votes. Much closer. State polls, 49.02. National polls, 45.1. Unsure, 5.8. Let's now do truth. And on truth, also closer. State polls, 51%. National polls, 37%. 12% unsure with 142 votes. All right, now we get to the real cream of the crop here. Twitter is going to have the most, without a doubt, the most votes cast. All right, so let's do it. And with Twitter, 2,575 votes that are cast on Twitter. State polls holds an overwhelming lead, 66.8% to 22.8% for national polls and 10.4% unsure. So this is my idea, and I know it's not over yet, but bear with me. This is what I've been thinking. I've been thinking we do, whoops, I'm sorry, I just made Laura the layout. I've been thinking that we do, because I do need to keep a national trend, right? But that we basically do a monster poll, all right? Which is what we did in 2016. We had the national trends, and at that time it was a panel, which is going to be voter file here. And we oversample a state or a group of states within each national poll. All right. So for instance, maybe we get a 2,000 something sample national poll, but within that national, we're going to separate that from, because we don't overrepresent. Maybe we overpoll or oversample Florida and North Carolina that day, or maybe we oversample Iowa and New Hampshire another day. And then, so this way we can do them both. It's cheaper for me to do it that way, but it's also, I feel, it's more informative. It really is. And then this way we can also break down geographic demographics within each state as opposed to just by region. Got a lot of always get questions too about what states fall into what regions. We will soon be changing slightly our questionnaire just so it's easier for us to show you, and you'll be able to see what states are what, even though don't take too much out of it. When it's the national numbers, take it with a grain of salt because they'll be small. The region is what it will matter, and it will outline to you what states are what region, because we do it like the exit polls to make things not simple, but consistent. So you can compare being consistent, so we could always break it down to Southwest, and we could always break it down, but we need those four major regions: the Northeast, the Midwest, the South, and the West. All right. And then we can give you, what about the Southwest? What about the Pacific Northwest? We could always do that, but we're doing that to make it as easy as possible. Just now, what are the battleground counties? You mean for 2024? Sauk in Wisconsin, Erie in Pennsylvania. That's a great example. There's going to be a lot of them, frankly. But I imagine you mean for the general election, right? Yeah, that would be it. Let's see. I'm trying, Laura. I'm trying. There's a lot of them, Laura. I mean, sometimes you put a lot in there. Yeah, Florida's been angry. Their government has been AWOL the last few months. Aren't they angry? Yes, they are. And I think that's a part of it. We've been hearing an earful from voters and from people we've asked, hey, why did you do what you did? Why didn't you wait to hear from DeSantis? And what we heard was he's a great governor. He should stay governor. Right, Laura? And then two is we've never heard from him. We hear that a lot as well. So they're hearing from him now because they know how damning it is to lose your own state delegation, which he is, with the exception of one. As you may know, 06 and above don't produce anything. They edit and sign. It's 04, 05 that produce those documents. Joel, yeah. What was public opinion of Fauci during 2020? Even if Trump could have fired Fauci, how would that have played out electorally? He was still very trusted, but he couldn't, and I'm glad you put that up there. He wasn't able to fire Fauci. This idea like, Trump could have fired Fauci, DeSantis would have fired Fauci. Trump did not have the power to fire Fauci. He could have asked a subordinate to do it or relieve him. And then guess what? Because of public sector unions, there's a huge culture of appellate processes and agencies and bureaucracies like this. It would have been a very timely process. You never would have saw the end of Fauci until it was politically viable for him to be kind of like pushed aside. And it would have been political suicide. Even if Trump had the power to do it, it would have been political suicide. They would have crucified him and he would have scared the hell out of a lot of older voters. So it wouldn't, honestly, probably wouldn't have been as close as it was. Unpopular question, but is Tate Reeves of Mississippi actually in any trouble? I don't know yet, but that's a good question. Stay tuned with that, okay? Really, I know. I just really started to look into it. Haven't really, done any work myself with it. But does RFK jumping in the race open the door for the other D candidates, even if Biden is in the race? I don't know, because the fact is RFK Jr. isn't part of the Democratic establishment anymore. And the fact is the names we've been floating as potential Dem candidates, they are. So they're not going to break with the White House. It's not going to happen. Pete Buttigieg is not going to leave his Secretary of Transportation to run for president. Believe me, there is one guy who's been trying like hell to recruit people to run against Joe Biden. He's having a very difficult time. Can't support anybody who voted for Obama. No more Kennedys in government, please. What is the RNC doing? I will say this, though. Just remember that many, many Trump voters in Ohio and Iowa and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they voted for Obama. So sometimes the most sincere conversions to MAGA are the ones who are, in fact, conversions, not ones who pretended to be conservatives their whole life and then turned out to be big frauds. Just remember that. That's the question about RFK's voice being a detriment. I do think he's going to have to do something about that, like his father did, right? I do. I think he's going to have to fix it. RFK, the original RFK, was also very awkward when he spoke. Again, great documentary on Netflix right now about RFK. You just type in Kennedy, it's going to pop up. And his advisors, I mean, they'll be the first to tell you when they first saw him speak, they were like, this is going nowhere. This guy can't talk to people. His voice is irritating. He's not good at it. He learned. He worked on the tone, and he got in his element. And I'm telling you, when you see RFK around people, RFK Jr., the retail level, he's pretty good. Yes. Will he take away any moderate Dems who are considering voting for Mr. Trump? This is the thing, Otis. If Democrats were smart, they would nominate RFK. Because go look at the polling and go look at, well, you'll see it more in the new polling because RFK support increased, so it's a bigger number. But you'll see that significant numbers of RFK voters won't vote for Joe Biden. They won't, but they would vote for Donald Trump against Joe Biden. Now, if RFK is in the race, Trump's going to lose that vote. It's going to go to RFK. So it really interesting dynamic, It can absolutely hurt Donald Trump. I think RFK would be problematic for Trump. I do. And I mean, hard to beat. Will RFK Jr.'s popularity on the right hurt him in the primary? Yeah, they'll try to make it hurt him. Great working title. Great. First of all, again, for everyone, you too, thanks for the tip. But if I missed anybody's, thanks. But yeah, I do think they're going to try to paint him as some vaccine nutcase conspiracy theorist who, by the way, is like MAGA. They're like the QAnon version of the left. Like, even though it's so funny, like Rachel Maddow is the QAnon version of the left. The hell are you talking about? Malcolm Nance is QAnon level crazy on the left. The walls are closing in. Is it a potential warning sign that Trump in the polls can't quite get to 50% and above mark for him versus Biden? Not yet, because I thought, and good question, Elon, I thought it was myself much earlier in this process. But then I noticed it's like that for everybody. It's not just Biden. It's not Trump. It's not just DeSantis. Even other very well-known people below 50 because of this very large group of someone else or some other candidate or a third-party candidate. That will shrink as time goes on. But it wasn't like that in 2020. It was in 2016. Trump and Hillary both were bobbing between like 38 and 45% during our entire tracking. Trump had a higher ceiling in our tracking than Hillary did, but he kept falling down as well. As time went on, Hillary got the last of those someone else's, and some people just, didn't vote, But I don't think it is yet. And I think, honestly, the big warning sign for me with DeSantis' support is that he only seems to be doing better because people who don't know who he is pull back on Biden. But they'll find out who he is, and they're going to vote for Biden anyway. Like I said, suspect demographics, Mark Mitchell said. And that is so true. I couldn't agree more. Trump supporters know how to ballot harvest. The question is, will his people do it competently? He does want to ballot harvest. He is probably the only candidate who understands that you need a harvesting operation. That's what he wants to spend his money on. He doesn't want to waste it in a primary. I'll tell you that. I don't know that everyone else quite gets it. I don't. And then the establishment people that surround DeSantis, they pretend like they have this operation under control, like California Republicans pretend like they were so great at harvesting. That's bull. Their type of voter is the voter who already votes by mail. Makes it look like they did a great job. Dave McCormick did a great job. Dave McCormick's campaign in Pennsylvania had a great early vote operation. Mark Molinaro did a great job before and harvesting. but it is not widely spread at all. Do I really think the GOP is stupid or just disinterested in winning elections until Trump goes away? I believe a little bit of both, Blackfish. It's intentional on many levels. Yeah. As long as they can survive the loss, which many times they can. Let's face it. They still are playing the game. They're still in the game. If Trump's in, they're not in the game anymore. That's why so many people went to DeSantis to convince him to run anyway, because they felt like they couldn't take another. Look, who did it? The Robes, the Ryans, right? What happened to them in 2022? They got their kicked. Then there's one firm specifically, which we're going to be talking more about soon. And they're just getting crushed. So they're in 2022, they got their, you know what, handed to them. So they're starting to see a real danger that there's just going to be nowhere for them and others like them to go. Nobody hires Neil Newhouse anymore. That's who's putting out the polls for DeSantis. His public opinion strategy, he built that firm, basically. He does have partners, but he was the face of it. He was Mitt Romney's pollster. I put it up on Politico. I put the old school Politico article up the other day. He's the founder of the Unskew the Polls movement, which obviously was wrong, phony. I would even use fake. He was wrong. Can we get some crosstabs, by the way? I don't care what you put up. I can't. If you're going to put out a push poll, can we at least get crosstabs? Yeah, I mean, that's why they don't put it out, Laura. Exactly. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, Blackfish. Getting really frustrated with the dumb, lazy, unsophisticated GOP can't win elections narrative. It's like calling the border invasion incompetent. It's all clearly intentional. I do think, though, it's both. I do. And I know that's sad, but it's the truth. Some are really that dumb. Trust me, I've been talking with them. They are that stupid. Can we get an update on New Hampshire and Chris Sununu? Why don't we really see him lever any support toward the Republicans? That's a great question. I thought that Sununu would be a problem for Trump in New Hampshire. He is not. Can Trump flip Maine, the whole state? LePage got killed up there in 2022. He could take the 2nd congressional district. He could get close. I mean, in a total wipeout of an election, I just think that the ballot harvesting is in ranked choice now in Maine. I just think that it's, 2nd congressional district. That's about as good as it's going to get. Trump went on full send podcast, said that he thinks there is a better and more courageous Republicans when asked about DeSantis VP. Did DeSantis kiss his political career, or is there a way out? Kill his political career. Trump's actually kind of a, if he would I don't know. I don't want to give him advice. I don't know if I should say that or not. I think it's salvageable. I do. It's just that I don't think he's going to do it. He's not going to make the right decision. I keep seeing Sue, thanks for the chat. I keep seeing folks say Trump sides with Disney and Anheuser-Busch. I haven't seen that at all from Trump Sr. Is that true? No. Anheuser-Busch is donated to Trump. So, obviously he's going to accept those donations and want those donations to keep coming. I don't see him siding with Disney at all. I just see him mocking DeSantis for losing to Disney. Because he did. Or at least, I don't want to say he lost. He did not deliver what he promised and made it out like he was going to deliver. And what region should Trump choose his VP from? That's a really good question. I don't know, though. And by the way, I will say Don Jr. Sue did not say the right thing about Anheuser-Busch. That was kind of stupid. I mean, just let your enemies kill themselves. Don't inject. You don't always have to open your mouth. All right. But yeah, so that was a kind of a dumb thing. But then they exaggerate. All right. Just like the comments on abortion, Sue. All Trump said was what conservatives claim to be their position on abortion for 40 years, that the state should decide. Trump is the man who ended Roe v. Wade. If you're going to try to out-pro-life him, you're going to lose. Everybody has long said the federal government shouldn't have any role in this issue. States should decide. They're trying to outflank Trump by saying there should be a federal law banning abortion. You open the door for that legally, then you open the door for a ban on banning abortion. It's been a 10th Amendment issue for years. So stupid. Again, you guys are going to get to Iowa, and he's going to just stand up and go, I ended Roe v. Wade. Thank you. It's over. You ever been to the Iowa State Fair? Crying out loud. And what region should he choose his VP from? I'm not sure the region matters yet, though I see what you're talking about. I just think that some candidate can be from another part of the country and yet still have a regional appeal. Like attitudinally, Trump does so much better in the gritty part of the South, Kentucky, Tennessee, than other Republicans have done. That's why did you see the Kentucky polls? Like Trump plus 50. And then even though he's a billionaire from Queens, he also did so much better than any other candidate in the Rust Belt since 1984 and 88. So I get your point. I'm just not sure we can't have like some kind of cross-attitudinal appeal, which I think we can. Have to see, though. And do I think Joe Kent is a viable option for VP? I think you need a VP who served in office. And that, I'm going to say, to blanket statement all other suggestions. Do I think a certain someone would be an awesome vice president and is never going to let Trump's voters down? I do. I just not sure that Americans would be okay with someone who hasn't held some kind of elected office being a vice president. Maybe I'm wrong. They hired a businessman to be a president, but Trump was the head of a mega corporation, of a brand with universal name recognition. And let's face it, people don't like to admit this, but it's true. That was envied everywhere. Like if you were a dude, you wanted to be Donald Trump. If you were a woman a certain age, Benny, I think brought this up, Benny Johnson. He's like, have you met like my mom or something? Like they loved Trump because they remember him in the 80s and the 90s and Mr. Swagger, right? And so I think Kent is going to be a rock star in the national stage if he becomes a congressman, which I think he's got a great shot at, as long as Kevin McCarthy doesn't have his people send out mailers comparing him to Hitler and Bernie Sanders again. That's a sabotage seat. Kent is another one. That's a sabotage seat. Republicans should have won, but they sabotaged themselves because they didn't want people like Joe Kent there. That's fact. It's fact. Kevin McCarthy thought he was going to run up the table in Connecticut 5, Rhode Island 2, and Virginia 7, and he was just going to roll home from Virginia 2 to 7. And he didn't need Joe Kent. He didn't need John Gibbs. He didn't need J.R. Majewski. He didn't need all these people. So he killed them. Let's see what else. But I think once he becomes a bigger figure, Joe Kent could like literally be, yeah, he could, Laura. He's got it, and the media can say what they want to say about him, but could you imagine if a Democratic candidate's wife was killed in the line of duty because the deep state didn't listen to the Democratic president of the United States and end a war that had no consent from the governor or the president or the Congress? Could you imagine that? He would be a national hero right now. A national hero. Instead, our election mafia, like Dave Wasserman, call him conspiracy pusher. You couldn't cut Joe Kent's toenails, you little twerp. You sniveling little twit. Smear a man like that. I would love to see you do the army. I would love to see you do the ammo carry exercise. You want to get through log PT with me? It would crush you. You'd drop it on all your teammates. I cannot stand this cubicle class insulting people that I know what that man has been through. When you share an experience, and he's had way more than me. You share an experience like that, there's just a certain level of respect. It doesn't matter who you are, what you believe. Not many people get through it for a reason. And you couldn't hold a friggin' candle to that man. Conspiracy pusher. Anyway, Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the new version behind me, of course, which is that one right there. Great first start. Chapter 1 was last week. The recording's up there if you want to check it out and catch up. YouTube, you will have the link, obviously, sent to you on the Zoom link, sent to you on Sunday. But it will be before the scheduled time, which is 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bernard Bailyn, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. Just an amazing start to this book. And we did 2 on foreign policy. Now we're going to talk about American history and the American national identity, the philosophies that really, truly did birth the revolution. Funny because the 1619 Project has their crap going on right now. Doesn't look like you got anywhere with that little stunt of yours, does it? Because it's filled with garbage and the biggest lie of all, which is that the American Revolution was started to preserve slavery. Lies. Chapter 1, he lays out that you really see the main vehicle of spreading the ideas that started the revolution in what were known as pamphlets. They represent the vast majority of the literature, and that these ideas were radical and revolutionary, but not in the way of upending society and starting something totally new there. No, they wanted to improve on the Constitution, to obviously change from a monarchy, of course, to something looking back in history, what worked, what didn't, what was the best system of government to preserve the natural state of liberty for man. They wanted to show God that they could do it, that we can live as God intended and in a nation on earth. It's beautiful. Chapter 2 coming up Sunday, Eastern Standard Time. Don't miss it. It's fantastic stuff. Just so fantastic. A little bit weird because Bernard Bailyn writes, I think he read one too many pamphlets, and he writes a little bit awkward, many commas. It's difficult. I'm doing, my best to follow along. Others will start to engage and read this week. Give me a little bit of a break, right? But you got to get used to the flow and the style of it. You don't need to read to join the book club and hang out with us in the book club. You don't even need to have the book. We'll discuss it. We'll read. We'll discuss it. We'll have a great old time. It really is super fun, Sue. Come by 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I know you're a supporter on Locals. You'll see it if you can. If not, you know what? Definitely check out the archive. Local supporters, check out the archive. And if you missed it last Sunday, then you can kind of recap. It's 2 hours long. You don't have to stay for the whole time. Stay as long as you can. We try to get the reading done within that first hour, if possible, and then have discussions. What else? YouTube, you don't have access to it for the simple reason that I'm not going to police everyone else's thoughts. So if I was to upload it to YouTube and somebody said something, even on a private video, that YouTube doesn't like, I'm going to get dinged for it. So it's a Zoom meeting that is archived up on People's Pundit Daily. I will send you, Laura, remind me, I have a discount code for YouTube members, like paid members. If you want to jump on ship on Locals, I have a code that can help you because I know you pay to be a member on YouTube. I forgot to put it up last week. I'm going to put it up this week. It'll cover, hopefully the monthly cost of what you paid to become a member. And then if you wanted to, you could cancel and move over to Locals as if you kind of like seamlessly transitioned. Totally up to you. I just would rather you guys at least become a member on Locals, because this way, if something happens, I get a strike on YouTube, I can't even go to the community section to send you a comment. Hey, I got a strike. You just think I disappeared. It's happened multiple times. We've gotten the comments from people who are mad about it. What happened to you this week? It's not our fault. Sometimes the strikes are 2 weeks. There's nothing we can do about it, and we can't communicate with you. So at least sign up on Locals, become a member, and if you like it, become a supporter. All right? Sound good? All right, with that in mind, thanks so much to everybody who came today. Thanks for our sponsors, forpatriots.com. Don't forget, they have Power Generator, right? Yep, you're going to grab it for me. The Patriot Power Generator on sale right now, but also bundled with the 3-month survival kit. Use the promo code TPP10 at checkout. Forpatriots.com, promo code TPP10. Jam and Bean, 40% off that new subscription and 10% off every subsequent subscription. Use the promo code TPP40 at checkout. And of course, get started at Field of Greens with 15% off. You can go to fieldofgreens.com and use the promo code just TPP. All right, that'll get you 15% off and get you started. Healthy weight loss, great fruit and vegetable supplement. And we will see you on, we don't see you Sunday, we'll see you Monday.
Wait. Marty had a question. She wants to know if you started it yet. The book.
The new book?
Mm-hmm.
We just did chapter 1, Marty. That's all.
Which you can find on Locals.
Yeah, which you can find on Locals. Chapter 2 now, Sources and Traditions, we're going to do this Sunday. But I just kind of recap chapter 1. What he basically is saying, Sue, is that the pamphlet was the main vehicle that these ideas were, spurred and debated and cultivated and nurtured and then obviously put forward. And by the way, they were always trying to convince people it wasn't about destruction like the British pamphleteers were, like totally annihilate your political opponents, and like how it is now, frankly, in our country. The goal, because they felt like they were the children of the age of reason, the goal was really to debate and come to the who had the most logical, rational, reasonable argument, right? Some approached it through natural law. Some approached it through common law, difference of Jefferson versus Adams. And then again, they weren't trying to, unlike the Russian and French Revolution, they weren't trying to off with your head, Robespierre go nuts. They were trying to develop the most perfect or a more perfect system of government that nurtured and encouraged men to live in a state of nature that preserves liberty, or in a state, the closest state of nature that preserves liberty. All right. And unlike the Russians and the French who went nuts, they did not want to overturn the natural order of things. And great one, we're going to read by John Adams, a letter where his wife, Abigail, is like, while you're at it, why don't you give us women some rights? And they believed women should have rights. But he's like, honey, whoa, if I do that, everyone's going to come after us. And we're holding this thing together by a thread. By a thread. It'll come, and it'll come in time, because that's the system we're building. All right. So great. It really is a great book. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for everybody watching. We're going to go ahead and kick rocks now. Again, book club Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be on social media, but we'll see you on Monday if you're not there for book club. Noon Eastern Standard Time. All the best, folks. Go ahead, Laura.
Deuces.
Deuces.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends, and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be